Next, Lionel Shriver writes a column this week about a decision by the Texan Supreme Court to ban so-called gender-affirming care. What is gender-affirming care, and why does Lionel think it was a good idea to ban it? She joins me now. You write in your column this week about a decision by the Supreme Court in Texas. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there have been a number of Republican-dominated legislatures that have passed laws banning so-called gender-affirming care for minors. It's not making it illegal to get sex change operations and medical treatment for adults. It's all about kids. And there have been states such as Florida where the courts have struck these laws down as a violation of so-called trans kids' civil rights. But I observe in the column that we deny all kinds of what we might call rights to children routinely. We don't let them work in factories, buy cigarettes, buy alcohol, get married, or have sex with adults. And that's actually a much longer list, but nobody objects that it's not fair that kids can't buy cigarettes. So I think this is falsely framed as a civil rights issue. So I'm looking at the decision in Texas where the state Supreme Court upheld the law, and that's made progressives hysterical, as usual.
Because the default position before this would have allowed children to get that gender-affirming help.
Well, there's now an entire industry which is moving shocking numbers of children into a pathway which is almost inevitably going to lead to permanent medicalization for the rest of their lives, and often life-changing, irreversible, and I would say mangling surgery. So it's not a small matter. It's more advanced in the U.S. and more culturally entrenched and than in the U.K. And while especially continental Europe is starting to move away from this as maybe not the best way to treat confused underage people, for the U.S. it's become a political cause. So, and I think, I think we're in the midst of a major medical scandal that we will look back on in much the same way that we look back on giving people lobotomies to solve their mental illness. I just think the results are ghastly. The truth is that most children who are unhappy with their sex grow out of it. And the main thing that they need to do is go through puberty, and that's what gender-affirming care won't let you do. You're put on puberty blockers. And that itself is medically highly dubious, can lead to bone thinning, and it inhibits mental development. Puberty it may be confusing, it may be often unpleasant, and it feels like your body's being taken over, which it is. It's being taken over by adulthood, but it's medically vital, and we started interfering with it at scale without any real research on what the consequences are. And I think that down the road, we're probably going to be looking at class action suits by a lot of very unhappy young adults who want to come to some understanding as to how they were allowed to do this or why this was done to them. We don't let children make major decisions for themselves for a good reason. They don't know what they're doing. They haven't been around long enough to make life-changing decisions of this order. And of course, a lot of the problem is parents. So I don't think that we should be letting parents make these decisions on behalf of children either, because it's not their lives that are at risk. Their ability to have children that are at risk, or their ability even to reach orgasm in adulthood.
And to that point you mentioned just then, which is the fact that if you look across the world, it seems as though in Europe and UK, slightly retreating from some of these positions, or at least not going as all in. And I just wondered, why do you think it has become so politicized in the US? Is it political parties? Is it becoming part of a culture? Or what is it that's got it to that point?
I think it's the success of civil rights in relation to everyone else. It's all they could find. They need, when you have been broadly successful in relation to race. I mean, not to whitewash racial relations in the U.S., but in terms of the law, that's pretty ironed out. The only kind of racial discrimination that's legal is affirmative action, and I wouldn't do that either. Another topic. But I think most of all, it was the success of the same-sex marriage movement, and that was that stood up in the Supreme Court. So that is over. So there's nothing wrong with being gay. Can't be discriminated against for being gay. So there was just this desperation for a new cause, and I thought it was not a coincidence that right on the heels of widespread acceptance of same-sex marriage, suddenly came up this weird obsession with transgenderism, and therefore a new population that needs protection from bigotry.
And what is the argument from those activists who see that ruling in Texas and, as you say, are appalled by it? Do you understand at all where they're coming from?
I am familiar with the rhetoric. Yes, it's supposedly a matter of children's rights. And it's they portray these laws as anti-LGBTQIA+, whereas it has nothing to do with all those other letters. It's only about the T. So it makes it seem like this is a huge broadside on the rights of a vast number of people, whereas it concerns a much more specific population. And furthermore, they like to claim that these laws are in service of genocide, because supposedly if you do not provide gender-affirming care to people who identify as trans, then they're going to kill themselves. And there is no good evidence for this. The suicide rate before and after transition among this population is exactly the same. So getting gender-affirming care is not going to keep people from killing themselves anymore. And furthermore, while there's plenty of propaganda out there claiming that up to like 50% of the trans population kills themselves, this is rubbish. If you look at one study at Tavistock, it's 4 out of 15,000. Now, that's probably 4 too many. I agree. But it's not 50%.
Yeah. I suppose going back to the point you made earlier, which is about, how you can imagine a world where there's actually lots of class actions in the future from those who, when they are children, are given gender-affirming treatment, and then for some of the, the permanent features of that, could then, take action or be very unhappy in retrospect. Do you think there's also a portion of that group, people who do, children who are given this, who actually will get to the point that they are happy they had it, and in those cases, perhaps the gender-affirming treatment is what they need, or do you think it just shouldn't really be there for anyone until they reach adult age?
I agree. There are probably going to be a handful of people who are happy with the results. And a legislative solution is a crude tool, honestly. And I can see why doctors would be unenthusiastic about laws banning certain kinds of treatment, and it means that you can't be as individual in your decisions, but they're not taking decisions individually. They're taking a blanket approach so that they do give exactly the same treatment to everyone. And that's what gender-affirming care is all right. There is only one way to treat this, and that is to basically go through a sex change. And, I think long ago with this phenomenon, we passed the point where it's just, The people who are unhappy with the sex they were born are coming out of the woodwork and being, because they're going to be more accepted. This is way beyond that. This is a raging social fad, which is especially taken hold in schools. And the people who are most vulnerable to it have many other mental health problems, may have social problems, maybe don't fit in. This is an instant way to get huge amounts of attention, and as the expression has it, affirmation. Who doesn't want affirmation? And it means your parents are going to be doting on you, your teachers are going to be doting on you. The way this is now constructed, the trans kids are sanctified in the social milieu at school. It's incredibly seductive. So we're dealing with a massive social contagion, which is possibly doing a lot of medical harm. And that's why I think legislation coming in and saying this has to stop is a good idea, partly because the American Medical Association and the American Pediatric Academy is all in with this stuff. So you can't count on the medical establishment to put brakes on.
And just final question, you mentioned in your piece about Corinna Cohn. I wonder if you could just tell viewers about that case.
Corinna Cohn, who now goes by Corey, transitioned at the age of 19 in 1994. And he still identifies as a so-called transsexual, which is the term we used to use. He accepts now that he is male and has always been male. He regards his transition as a failed fantasy. In fact, he emphasizes that this is not even about treating a mental illness. It is about fulfilling someone's fantasy. And it's a false fantasy. You can't change sex. And I would say, furthermore, well, if you do manage to change sex, what have you accomplished? It is not a meaningful achievement in the world. And I don't think that, because I don't believe sex explains identity or should really be all of your identity. Even if you manage to switch sides, that's a very broad category and it doesn't get you anywhere as a person. But this Corinna Cohn is one of the people who testified before the state legislature in support of the bill. And he's now on a campaign specifically to ban pediatric transition.